If Leah Parker had driven past 5 minutes later, she never would have seen the dog. And if she hadn't seen the dog, 20 girls would still be trapped in the dark beneath a school no one remembered. The cold that morning in Fairpoint, Indiana felt weaponized, the kind that cut through gloves, cracked lips open, and made your lungs ache just to breathe. Brookstone Intermediate had been boarded up for 7 years. Fire code violations, mold, asbestos, reasons layered over each other like excuses people eventually stopped questioning. Now it stood like a broken jaw in the middle of town, windows shattered, silence heavy. Except this morning, it wasn't silent. Leah was halfway through sipping burnt drive-through coffee when she caught the sound. Sharp, rhythmic, relentless. Barking, not panicked, not playful. Urgent. She slowed, then braked hard. At the edge of the front lot, barely visible beneath a drift of snow and flurries of blown asphalt, a German shepherd stood rigid, barking at a rust-stained hatch tucked into the foundation wall of the gymnasium wing. No leash, no collar, covered in a dusting of ice. His paws left deep marks in the snow, each one pressed in the same spot like he'd been holding vigil for hours. She killed the engine, opened the door. The dog didn't flinch. "Hey, buddy," she called softly, stepping out. The wind slapped her hard across the cheek. Her breath clouded the air as she approached, badge clipped to her belt, fingers flexing inside her gloves. The shepherd turned to glance at her, just once, then whipped his head back toward the hatch and barked again. One bark, then another, sharp, timed, pointed. Not the kind you ignore. There was a scar under his right eye. Faint, but not old, a place where the fur never grew back. Leah's boots crunched closer. "You belong to anyone?" she murmured, crouching down. He didn't answer, of course, but something about the way he stood, muscles taut but grounded, his body between her and that door, told her this wasn't just some stray. This was trained behavior. He was guarding or alerting. Maybe both. She looked at the hatch. Steel, bolted. Slightly warped, like it had once been forced open and then hammered shut in a hurry. Ice gathered along the seam, but the handle was clean. Too clean. The dog barked again, louder this time. And then, to her surprise, he pawed at the door. Not randomly. Not like a dog digging. It was a gesture. Intentional. Leah straightened, heart beginning to pound. Not from the cold. She pulled her radio from her belt, but hesitated. What would she say? That a random dog wouldn't stop barking at a locked hatch on condemned property? That her gut felt like it was bracing for something it hadn't met yet? Number. She reached out instead and touched the hatch. Warm. She jerked her hand back like she'd touched fire. That made no sense. It was 18 degrees. The wind chill had pushed it lower. Nothing should be warm. The dog barked again. "Okay," she said under her breath, trying to reason through what made zero sense. "You're either crazy or you're the smartest damn dog I've met in years." She backed up. The shepherd stopped barking and sat again, staring dead ahead at the hatch. Statuesque, like he was made of carved instinct and muscle memory. Leah pulled her phone and snapped a quick photo of the dog, then the door. She needed to check permits, utility lines, school district files, anything that could explain this. But as she turned to go, the dog stood and followed, falling into step beside her like he belonged to her. She glanced sideways. "All right," she muttered. "Let's figure this out." They reached her cruiser. Leah opened the passenger door without thinking, and the shepherd jumped in like it was his usual seat. She shook her head, jaw tight. "Please don't be right," she whispered as she pulled away. But she already knew he was. Back at the station, she pulled her supervisor aside. "You're not going to like this," she started. Sergeant Dole didn't even look up from his coffee. "What is it this time?" "A dog, shepherd, found him at Brookstone. He was..." barking at a hatch. Dole raised an eyebrow, finally meeting her eyes. You called me in here about a dog barking at a door? Leah's jaw clenched. The hatch was warm. On a day like this? That's not nothing. It's an abandoned building, Leah. Could be an old boiler kicking on. Could be a raccoon. Raccoons don't bark, Sarge. He snorted. Dogs do. She wanted to scream. Instead, she took a breath and placed her phone on the desk, screen facing him. Look at him. Look how he's positioned. That's not panic. That's trained alert posture. Dole stared at the photo, unimpressed. You sure you're not seeing your brother in this again? The words cut sharper than the wind outside. She didn't answer. Didn't need to. Fine, Dole said, sighing. I'll flag the location for a welfare check, but we're not cutting into private property unless you've got probable cause, or at least a noise complaint from someone who's not four-legged. Leah grabbed her phone and turned to leave. Behind her, Dole called out, Just don't let that mutt sleep in the cruiser again. Last time you did, it smelled like wet fur for a week. She didn't respond. Back in the parking lot, the dog, Axel, she was calling him now, waited inside her car like he'd always belonged there. She stood for a long moment before getting in. The hatch hadn't made a sound while she was there, but her skin still burned where the steel had touched it. Warm, in the middle of winter. Axel lifted his head as she slid in behind the wheel. What are you trying to tell me, boy? She whispered. Axel was silent, but his eyes were as sharp as knives. But he didn't look away from the direction of Brookstone either. Not once. And Leah Parker knew. The feeling in her gut wouldn't let her sleep until she went back. Leah didn't sleep that night. The house was too quiet, and Axel was too still. He hadn't barked since they left the abandoned school, hadn't eaten either. Instead, he lay stretched out by the front door, eyes open, chest rising and falling in a rhythm that felt too controlled to be rest, like he was waiting for something. Or someone. Leah stood in the kitchen with a mug of untouched coffee, watching him through the archway. The heat clicked on, pipes creaked. Somewhere outside, wind howled against the siding, but Axel didn't move. The silence felt heavier than the cold. She set the mug down, walked over, sat cross-legged on the floor beside him. You know I'm going to ask, she said softly. Axel flicked his ear but didn't lift his head. Leah reached out, running her fingers along the fur at his neck, just under the jaw. Coarse and thick, familiar, steady. You remember Josh, don't you? The dog's eyes blinked once. Slow, deliberate. Of course he did. Josh Parker had been 28, calm under pressure, sharp but funny. Everyone loved him, even the people he arrested. He'd been the golden boy of Fairpoint's Special Enforcement Task Force, the first to volunteer, the last to leave the scene, and the only person Leah ever truly trusted to have her back. And Axel had been his shadow. They'd gone everywhere together, trained in Georgia, graduated top of their K-9 unit class, certified in tracking, narcotics, and victim recovery. There were stories about Axel sniffing out a runaway hiding in an abandoned grain silo after a 2-day snowstorm, and when Josh was assigned to an undercover human trafficking task force out of state, he fought to bring Axel with him. The last mission had been in Springfield. 6 girls rescued. Josh didn't come back. The explosion hadn't been part of the plan. It wasn't even supposed to be risky, just surveillance and follow-up. But someone on the inside had tipped off the wrong person at the wrong time. Leah had been the one to identify the body. Axel had survived. Barely. The blast had thrown him into a wall, cracked 2 ribs, damaged his left hip. When they found him, he was curled next to Josh's body, his muzzle bloody from trying to pull him out. No one could get him to move. Leah had flown down herself. When she walked into the triage tent, Axel lifted his head once, then buried his face into her leg. She brought him home. Retired status. No further deployments. His K9 badge hung in a frame on her living room wall, next to Josh's. That was 2 years ago. Axel adjusted better than anyone expected. He liked routine, morning walks, postmen he didn't trust, fireplaces and long naps and every squeaky toy he eventually destroyed. He was older now, maybe 10, but he still moved with the kind of precision that couldn't be untrained. But tonight, he was different. Leah watched him with a quiet unease, crawling under her skin. "You've never barked like that before," she whispered. "Not since—" Her voice trailed off. She didn't say Josh's name again, didn't have to. Axel shifted, slowly stood, walked to the front window and stared out into the dark, his posture straight, his breath controlled, the stance of a soldier waiting for orders. Leah rose and stood beside him. There was nothing out there, but her gut said otherwise. The next morning, she drove back to Brookstone. Officially, she wasn't supposed to. There was no open case, no warrant, no probable cause. Just a shuttered school, a warm hatch, and a dog who refused to look away. She parked across the street, engine off, fingers drumming the steering wheel. Axel sat up beside her. "You're really not letting this go, are you?" she asked. He didn't blink. They stepped out. The air was colder today, brittle and biting. Snow had drifted over the footprints from the day before, but Axel padded through like he knew exactly where to go. The gym wing, the hatch. He reached it and sat. Same spot, same posture, same unwavering gaze. Leah followed, crouched and pressed her palm to the metal again. Still warm. She pulled back, breath caught in her throat. Every instinct she had screamed that something was wrong, and then a sound. Not a bark, not a creak, a thud. From beneath the hatch. Dull, muffled, like a weak fist hitting concrete from too far below. Leah froze. Axel growled. Low, steady. The kind of sound he made when he found something that needed immediate attention. This wasn't a fluke. She stood, heart racing, pulled out her phone and hit speed dial. Miguel answered after 2 rings. "You're not going to like this," she said. Oh God. What now? "I think there's someone under the school." Silence. "Come again?" "I just heard something. From the hatch. It's warm, and Axel's locked in on it like it's bleeding." "You need to stop," Miguel said, not unkindly. "You know how this looks, Leah." "I don't care how it looks. I care what's real." There was another pause. Then, "I'll be there in 20. She clicked off. Axel looked up at her, eyes calm, body still. She crouched beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You found something, didn't you?" she whispered. He blinked. This wasn't random. This wasn't behavior from a dog who'd aged out of purpose. This was a partner on alert, a soldier who hadn't retired at all, and Leah, for the first time since Josh's death, felt the unmistakable pull of something bigger than herself rising from the dark. She looked back at the hatch, then at Axel, and she knew. This wasn't over, it was just beginning. The wind carved through the parking lot like it had teeth. Even layered in thermal gear, Leah felt it gnaw at her neck as she and Deputy Miguel Ross stepped out of the cruiser in front of Brookstone. "This place gives me the creeps," Miguel muttered, pulling his beanie down lower over his ears. He looked barely old enough to shave, but had the sharpness of someone still trying to prove he belonged. "You didn't have to come," Leah said, not unkindly. "Yeah, well, you said something's breathing under a school. So, figured that beat filing inventory reports." Axel jumped out of the back seat without waiting. His paws hit the snow hard. He didn't sniff the air, didn't wander. He went straight to the side of the gym wing and sat in front of the same steel hatch, planted like a monument to certainty. Miguel stared at him. "That's the dog, huh?" Leah nodded. "That's the dog." Does he always act like he's about to uncover a murder? Only when he's right. They approached slowly. The hatch looked worse in daylight. Rusted bolts, dented edges. But it wasn't the damage that made Leah's stomach twist. It was the unnatural warmth radiating from the handle again. She crouched and touched it with her bare hand. Still warm. Maybe even warmer than yesterday. Miguel raised an eyebrow. Could be residual heat from old pipes. In 18-degree weather, after 7 years of vacancy? He didn't respond. Leah turned back to Axel. The shepherd's body was still but taut, tail stiff, ears pitched forward like antennae tuned to something just beneath the surface. Then, suddenly, he barked. Once. Loud. Then again. Miguel flinched. That bark was surgical, he said, half joking. It always is, Leah said. Then they heard it. Not a bark. Not wind. A sound that didn't belong in an empty building. Tap. Faint. Hollow. Then again. Tap. Tap. Miguel froze. You heard that? Leah nodded, blood draining from her face. She leaned in, pressed her ear to the hatch. The tapping stopped. She waited, then tap, tap. Same rhythm. Not random, not mechanical. Someone. Miguel, she said, rising fast, voice steady. That's not plumbing. He looked rattled, but trying not to show it. Could be pipes expanding, ice shifting. That was a pattern. You sure? Axel barked again. 3 sharp barks. Same direction, same posture, and this time, after the last bark, he pawed the hatch. Deliberate, just like yesterday. He's not guessing, Leah said. He knows. Miguel shifted his weight. So let's say there is something, or someone down there. It's still sealed. No power, no water. It's been condemned for years. And yet the steel is warm, he sighed. We don't have a warrant. You want to wait for one? We'll need more than a barking dog and a weird noise. Leah stared at the hatch. Her instincts were screaming now. That thud earlier wasn't mechanical. It was human, weak, distant, like someone hitting the underside of a coffin. She turned toward Miguel. Run a check, see if this property has any current maintenance orders, HVAC utilities, anything. Miguel pulled out his phone. She paced. Inside, her gut was boiling. She couldn't shake the image of Axel, his laser focus, his refusal to move. She'd seen that look before, back when Josh was alive, back when they pulled a girl out of a flood tunnel in Ohio. Axel had barked the same way, same rhythm, same absolute certainty. Dogs didn't bark like that for fun. Not dogs like him. Miguel looked up. Nothing. Properties listed inactive. No permits. No utility use in over 6 years. So explain the heat. He didn't try. Leah stepped back to the hatch and crouched again. Axel stood beside her now, tail low, eyes forward. He didn't need a bark to tell him something was wrong. Didn't look at her. Just waited. She pressed her palm against the metal. Still warm. Warmer. Then faintly, a sound rose up. Not tapping. Breathing. She snapped back, heart hammering. I heard someone, she said. Miguel didn't move. Leah, there's someone under this floor, and they're still alive. Miguel's expression darkened. Not disbelief. Conflict. Then a gust of wind whipped through the lot, and in the momentary silence that followed, they both heard it again. Tap. Tap. Pause. Then a tiny scrape. Axel barked again, twice this time, faster, more insistent. Miguel stared at the hatch. That's not nothing. No, Leah said. That's someone trying to stay alive. They stepped back from the hatch, the cold no longer registering. Miguel exhaled. You know they're going to say this is all circumstantial. Then we make it undeniable. He looked at her. How? Leah turned to Axel, crouched and placed both hands gently on his shoulders. He looked at her now, eyes steady, unreadable, but alert. We follow his lead. And in that instant, the dog barked once more, clear, precise, and didn't stop. Back at the precinct, the warmth of the squad room couldn't thaw the chill sitting deep in Leah's chest. Sergeant Dole barely looked up when she entered. He was elbow deep in paperwork, the kind that always seemed to multiply in winter months. His coffee steamed beside him, untouched. The room buzzed with the low hum of fluorescent lights and clacking keyboards. "We need to talk," Leah said, voice even but tight. Dole didn't flinch. "You've got 10 seconds before I regret letting you in without a report." Leah dropped a printed snapshot onto his desk. The photo showed the hatch behind Brookstone, the one with rust lines like dried blood and a dog standing sentinel. "He won't leave that door," she said. "And now there's more." Dole glanced at the image, unimpressed. "That's the same dog you mentioned yesterday." He barked again. Same spot, same rhythm, and we both heard something from the other side. Tapping, breathing. Dole sighed, leaned back. "This again. I brought Miguel with me this time. He heard it too." Dole finally gave her his full attention. His expression hardened. "Let me get this straight. You and a rookie deputy are claiming an abandoned building is haunted by the sound of a warm hatch and a retired K9's barking." Leah didn't blink. "There's someone down there." "Jesus, Parker, you need to take a breath." Her jaw locked. "You've always had instincts," he went on. "That's why I've let things slide before, but lately you've been too keyed in, too emotional. That fall 2 years ago changed you. You got quiet, obsessive." "I got focused," Leah snapped. "I didn't stop doing the job." Dole shook his head. "You stopped trusting anyone except a dog with a limp and a haunted stare." That hit deeper than it should have. "He's not just barking, Sarge. He's warning." Dole tapped a pen against the edge of the desk. "And you want me to approve what? Forensics? Ground radar? A warrant? Based on what, Leah? Barking? Based on the fact that no one else will, and I'm not going to be the one who ignored a cry for help." The silence stretched. Then, from behind her, Miguel spoke. "I heard it too," he said quietly. Leah turned. She hadn't known he'd followed her in. Miguel stepped forward. "It wasn't loud, but it was real. And that hatch is warm, even after snow. Something's off, Sarge." Dole looked between them. "You two need rest. You're not thinking clearly." Miguel hesitated. "Maybe we're just the only ones listening." That was the last straw. Dole stood. "Enough. I'm putting a temporary hold on any patrol activity around Brookstone. I don't want this turning into another ghost hunt that ends up on YouTube." Leah took a step forward. "That's a mistake." Dole met her gaze, tired but unmoved. "So is chasing shadows in a condemned school. You're dismissed." Leah didn't speak again. She turned and walked out. Miguel followed her into the hallway. The overhead lights buzzed, casting a sterile glow across the tile. "I'm sorry," he said. "You shouldn't be," she replied. "I still think you might be right." "Might?" she asked, sharp. He paused. "It's just, what if it's nothing? What if it's just old plumbing and paranoia?" Leah didn't answer. Miguel tried again. "I'm not saying you're wrong, but if we're going to push this further, we need more than instinct." She looked at him, something flickering behind her eyes. "That's the difference between you and me, Miguel. I already know it's real. I just need someone to believe it before it's too late." He looked away. That was all she needed to see. Back at her truck, Axel sat curled in the back seat, head lifted as soon as she approached. His eyes scanned her face, searching, waiting. She climbed into the driver's seat, slammed the door harder than she meant to, and gripped the wheel with white knuckles. "They think we're wrong," she said quietly. "They think we're seeing ghosts." Axel didn't move. Didn't blink. He just stared straight ahead. She turned the key. The engine growled awake. She didn't say another word, just pulled out of the lot, tires crunching over slush. There was no plan, no clearance, no backup. But as the streetlights flickered overhead and the town disappeared behind them, Leah drove the same way she had when Josh was still alive. Forward, focused, toward whatever came next. Axel shifted in the seat beside her, posture tightening as the old school came into view again. He knew. He always knew. And if she was the only one left willing to listen, then so be it. She'd follow him into the dark. Alone, if she had to. The wind had teeth again. It snapped at Leah's coat, burned her cheeks, and dragged dry snow and swirling sheets across the empty parking lot behind Brookstone. But she barely noticed the cold anymore. Axel was already ahead, paws cutting clean tracks in the powder as he made a sharp turn toward the back of the gymnasium. He wasn't trotting. He was leading, like always. Leah followed him in silence, flashlight off, eyes adjusting to the muted gray of pre-dawn. She hadn't told anyone she was coming back. Not Dole, not Miguel, no point. They'd made their stance clear, but Axel hadn't, and that was enough. He stopped near the base of the building, nose working furiously, tail stiff and level. Leah approached slowly, scanning the foundation wall. That's when she saw it. A hatch. Different from the one before. Smaller, lower, half buried in packed snow and dead leaves. The metal was aged, almost black with rust. Not the kind of thing you'd notice unless you were looking, unless, like Axel, you were trained to find things no one else could. She crouched and brushed the snow back with her glove. The handle was bent, old, but when she pressed her palm to the surface, warm. Again. Leah stared at it, a chill rising inside her that had nothing to do with temperature. She knelt, leaned in, ear pressed to the steel. At first, only the wind. Then, a sound, software wet, a whimper. Her breath caught. Another sound followed, barely audible, like someone trying to breathe through tears. Crying. Real. Human. "Oh my God," she whispered. Axel didn't bark. He sat close, eyes locked on the door, his body coiled like a spring. Waiting. Leah staggered back, heart racing. Her hands trembled as she pulled her phone and hit the call button. No answer. She tried again. Miguel picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy. "I found another hatch," she said. "Behind the gym. Different one. I heard someone. Crying. I'm not imagining it, Miguel. It's real." There was a pause on the line. "I'll meet you at the station," he said. "We'll push for emergency entry. Stay put." But she wasn't staying. Not here. Not while someone was trapped underground. She stood, looked back at Axel. "We're going to get them out, you hear me?" He tilted his head slightly, then returned his gaze to the door. She gave the hatch one last look, then turned, boots crunching across the snow. The cold bit deeper now, adrenaline fading into raw dread. The air smelled metallic. She reached the truck, threw open the door, climbed in, and turned the key. Axel always followed. But when she looked back, he wasn't there. She frowned. "Axel." Silence. She stepped out, scanned the lot. Nothing but snow and wind. "Axel," she called. Her voice echoed against the walls of the dead school. No answer. She retraced her steps toward the hatch. No paw prints, no barking. The air felt different. Heavy. Still. She knelt by the hatch again. The warmth was still there, but Axel was gone. Just gone. Her chest tightened. He wouldn't just leave. Not like that. Not when something was still happening. She stood quickly, spinning in a circle, scanning the yard, the fence line, the broken windows overhead. Nothing moved. Panic surged up her throat like bile. She grabbed her phone and texted Miguel. "The dog's gone. The hatch is warm. I need bolt cutters. Now." No response. She pocketed the phone and forced herself to breathe. Axel knew something, had led her here, and now he was gone. Not lost, not scared. Somewhere. doing what he always did, staying with someone who needed him more. She looked back at the hatch. The steel beneath her glove vibrated, barely perceptible, but there. And from the other side, one soft word, barely audible. "Please." Leah swallowed. She didn't move, didn't blink. Axel was gone, but he hadn't left her. He'd led her to the truth. Now it was up to her to make them believe it, because someone down there was still alive, and the clock had started ticking. The minutes stretched like wire. Leah stood frozen beside the hatch, phone in hand, but her eyes kept scanning the yard behind the school. No paw prints, no shadow moving across the snow, no sound of breath or padded feet, just the wind. Where the hell had he gone? She searched the perimeter first, calling his name in short bursts. "Axel!" Nothing. She moved faster, heart climbing her throat. Around the dumpster, behind the rusted loading dock, through the skeletal remnants of the old playground, where snow hung from twisted metal like frozen ghosts. Still nothing. Her boots slipped on the ice-crusted gravel as she moved back toward the gym wing, breath visible in sharp bursts. She checked every corner, every window, every patch of wind-packed snow. He had vanished. Her lungs burned. Her gloves were soaked through. But she kept moving. By the time she reached the fence line at the edge of the back lot, she felt a sharp stab of something she didn't let herself feel often. Panic, not for herself, for him. "Come on," she muttered aloud, voice fraying. "This isn't how you work. You don't vanish." The sun was trying to rise, but the clouds strangled the light. Everything looked gray and dead and wrong. She stopped, tried to think. Then she turned back toward the hatch, the one tucked behind the gym, the one she should have never walked away from. Her gut told her what her mind didn't want to accept. He'd gone back. Of course he had. He always went back. Leah sprinted. By the time she rounded the corner again, boots crunching fast over the ice, she was half out of breath. The hatch came into view first, still closed, still sweating heat into the cold morning air. And then she saw him. Axel, sitting perfectly still beside the hatch, eyes locked forward. He didn't turn as she approached, didn't even blink. Her legs slowed. She let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Jesus," she whispered, "you scared the hell out of me." She dropped to her knees in the snow, pressed her forehead gently to the side of his head. He didn't nuzzle back, didn't move. But he was warm, solid, alive, and watching, always watching. She followed his gaze, the hatch. Still warm, still sealed, still hiding someone on the other side. She reached out again, placed her hand against the metal. Waited. Then, barely there, a scrape. 1, 2. Her throat tightened. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. We're done asking for permission." She stood, pulled out her phone and typed a message to Miguel. "She's crying. I'm done waiting. Tell Dole I'll take the heat." Then she slid the phone into her pocket, turned back to Axel. He was already standing, poised, ready, the way he used to be before a building breach, before every mission she'd ever watched him walk into with Josh. That look hadn't aged. It hadn't faded with retirement. It was in him. Still. Always. She crouched next to him, one hand on his chest. "I know you can't open it, but I can." The wind rattled an old gutter overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cried out. The town was waking up, clueless. She stood and walked back to the truck. Axel followed, silent as a shadow. Inside the toolbox, she found what she needed. Bolt cutters, not regulation, but effective. Back at the hatch, she set to work. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold. She positioned the cutters over the first lock, rusted but still intact. Axel stood behind her, tail low, eyes locked on the seam in the steel. She hesitated. This was it. Crossing a line, breaking protocol. But what was protocol compared to a cry for help? With a breath that felt like it burned all the way down, she clamped the bolt cutters and twisted. The lock snapped. Axel didn't bark. He didn't need to. He just moved forward, pressed his nose to the edge of the hatch, and waited. The second lock went easier. And then, silence. Leah paused. From inside, a soft voice, cracked and desperate. Please, help. Not a hallucination. Not a trick. Human, alive. That was all she needed. She dropped the cutters, reached for the handle, and pulled. The hatch groaned open, steam rising from inside like breath from a monster's throat. The smell hit her first. Heat, sweat, Moldavian, and something older, something rotting at the edge of human. She reeled back, hand to her nose, eyes burning. Axel didn't flinch. He stayed at the edge, staring into the dark below, waiting. I'm going down, Leah said aloud. Maybe for him, maybe for herself. She clicked on her flashlight and stepped toward the darkness, but Axel didn't move to follow. He stayed behind, eyes still on the hatch. Body still, tail unmoving, watching, holding the door, because that's what guides do, even when the rest of the world refuses to follow. Miguel stood at the chain-link fence of the old gym's service entrance, breath visible in the winter air, his badge tucked under a hastily thrown hoodie. Leah met his eyes without a word. She didn't have to ask what changed. His expression said it all. Something had broken open inside him. I ran the files again, he said, voice low. You were right. Names. Faces. Some match-active missing persons cases from 4 states. A flicker of disbelief tightened Leah's jaw. She wanted to hug him. She didn't. There wasn't time for redemption arcs or apologies. Not tonight. Let's move, she said, already crouched by the hidden hatch behind the gym, where Axel was waiting, tense, silent, eyes flicking between the snow-packed ground and the cold steel plate barely the size of a suitcase lid. Miguel knelt beside them, pulled a set of bolt cutters from his duffel, and clipped the rusted padlock in 2 movements as if he'd rehearsed it 100 times. The hatch groaned as it opened. The air that rushed out was thick and sour, tinged with mold, bleach, and something far worse. Human. Axel let out a low growl, not out of fear, Leah had learned to tell the difference, but of urgency. Warning. Miguel gagged, turned his head away. Leah dropped the flashlight into the opening and followed. The metal steps moaned under her boots. Her breath came sharp and quick. Walls dripped condensation, pipes overhead hissed, and the beam of light cut through the darkness like a scalpel, revealing tiled walls the color of old teeth and floor drains stained with rust. There was a door at the end of the hallway. Heavy. Steel. No window. Leah knocked. Then again, no response. She was about to try the handle when Axel pressed forward, nose to the base of the door. He stiffened, ears high. Then that sound, barely audible, but unmistakable. A cough. Then a whimper. Miguel looked at her, pale. Do it, he said. They braced together. The lock was old, but industrial. Miguel swung the bolt cutter again, grunted as the latch snapped. When the door swung open, the smell hit them first, like sour breath, sweat, and time. Then came the silence. 20 pairs of eyes blinked back at them. Girls, young, some barely teenagers. Most too thin, skin pallid from lack of light. Some curled on cots. Others sat on the floor, backs against stained mattresses. One stood, hand shielding her face against the sudden brightness. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke, not even Axel. Then one of the girls stepped forward. Her voice cracked. Is it real? She whispered. Are you real? Leah knelt, heart cracking as she reached for the girl's hand. You're safe, she said. You're not alone anymore. Axel moved slowly between the girls, tail low but wagging, pausing at each one as if taking roll. A sniff here, a nuzzle there, no barking, no growling, just presence, silent comfort. The girl clutched Leah's hand tighter. They said nobody would come, that nobody could hear us. Leah's throat burned. He did, she said, nodding toward Axel. He heard you. It took nearly an hour to get them all out. Miguel called it in, quietly, carefully, to a trusted DHS contact who owed him more than one favor. EMTs arrived without sirens. The sheriff never showed. One by one, the girls emerged into the snowy night, squinting at the stars like they didn't believe in sky anymore. Leah stood to the side, watching. Axel sat beside her, as still as ever. You did good, partner, she whispered, her hand resting on the scruff of his neck. You found them when nobody else did. Axel didn't look up. He just kept his eyes on the hatch, as if he knew it wasn't over, not yet. Leah didn't sleep. None of them did. The basement rescue had cracked open a shell, but it wasn't the center. It was never the center. 20 girls, emaciated, disoriented, blinking into the sterile hallway light like newborn deer. They hadn't spoken much. Some cried, others stared. A few tried to run, but Axel, calm, firm, blocked them gently. Just like in training, herding without pressure, his presence grounded them in ways no words could. But Leah couldn't shake the tremble in her fingers. 20 girls, that meant something worse. There were more. Miguel sat slouched in a folding chair across from her at the precinct, his badge temporarily reactivated pending full clearance. The glow of the monitor illuminated the sweat on his brow. He was quiet now, but not dismissive. Since pulling the missing persons logs and finding 3 matches that aligned with known disappearances along the I-40 corridor, his silence carried the weight of guilt and resolve. They moved them, rotated every 2 weeks. That basement was a storage stop, he said finally. Leah blinked. Storage, he nodded. That's how Kane referred to it in the encrypted files. Storage. Cold. Clinical Axel, lying beside her desk, lifted his head, eyes alert. Something shifted. Leah stood slowly. Where is Kane now? Locked down, but not talking. Thinks we're still 2 steps behind. Then let's get ahead. The interrogation room was dim, lit only by a desk lamp that cast shadows across the tired face of Luther Kane. Late 50s, overweight, thinning hair, a maintenance worker who disappeared from employment records 6 years ago, but whose fingerprints had popped on the FBI's database the moment the basement door cracked open. Leah watched him through the glass. Kane was chewing a hangnail like it owed him answers. I know that look, Miguel muttered. He's not the head. Just the driver. Exactly. He's waiting for someone to make the call. She turned to Axel, crouched at her heel. Let's see if he responds to pressure. Kane barely acknowledged Leah when she entered. Just a glance, then a smirk. You the one with the dog? He's the one who found your graveyard. Kane let out a dry chuckle. I didn't touch any of them. You'll see. Check the cams. I just drove. You drove them into hell. Still not illegal to drive, last I checked. Miguel watched from behind the glass, arms crossed. Then he stepped in. He placed a tablet on the table and hit play. Security footage. Grainy but clear. Kane opening a hatch, pulling 2 girls out like crates. No urgency. Just routine. Kane's smile faded. You had no right. We had every right, Miguel said. And now we're flipping your phone. It's already pinged 3 towers. 2 of them match active construction zones owned by shell companies tied to an LLC in Baltimore. Kane blinked. Leah leaned in. You're not the top of this. We know that. You're the mule. But mules get trampled first when handlers run. So here's your chance to talk before they decide you're expendable. Axel let out a low growl. Not a bark, not a snarl. Just that subtle rumble from deep in his chest, the kind that prickled Kane's neck hairs. That sound had moved insurgents out of caves, Leah remembered. It still worked. Kane looked at the dog, then at Leah. Something broke. "I don't know his real name," Kane whispered. "But everyone calls him Doctor." Miguel stiffened. "What?" Kane nodded slowly. "Not the Doctor. Just Doctor, like he's above titles. Said he used to run black site trauma units overseas. Afghanistan. Maybe Sudan. Then he got creative." Leah's breath caught. She remembered the scars on the girl's wrists, stitched too neatly to be makeshift, the way some blinked unnaturally slow, like sedated patients. "Where is he now?" Kane shook his head. "Doesn't stay put, but his drop zones, always within 10 miles of a train yard." Leah and Miguel exchanged a look. Back in the war room, Leah pulled the last 6 months of train schedule data, cross-referenced it with known incidents and cell tower activity from Kane's device. A pattern emerged, too erratic to be coincidence. Rotating locations, always after sunset, always with tunnels nearby. One location popped, an abandoned textile plant in Asheville. Train tracks behind it, no reported activity, but Kane's phone had pinged there twice. Leah stood. "That's our next stop." Axel moved before she could say his name, already heading for the door like he'd known it all along. Behind her, Miguel pulled on his vest. "He knows this isn't over, doesn't he?" He knew before any of us. Outside, the air was sharp with oncoming winter. Leah opened the back of the vehicle, and Axel jumped in, silent, eyes ahead. No barking, no wagging, just waiting. Watching. Ready. The wind cut across the old truck stop like it remembered better days. Rust flaked off the corroded gas pumps. A broken, open 24 hours sign flickered uselessly over a boarded-up diner, now just another skeleton along the stretch of I-85. But Axel didn't care about any of that. His nose was buried in a patch of oil-stained concrete, tail stiff, body still. Then, without warning, he let out a low, guttural sound, a sound Leah had learned to trust more than most humans. She dropped to one knee beside him. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Axel didn't look up. He moved with purpose, his nose drawing invisible lines across the asphalt. Past the loading dock, past a stack of rotting pallets. And then he stopped again, right in front of an old maintenance shed behind the diner. Its door hung half shut on a twisted hinge, padlocked tight, but the stale scent of confinement rolled out like heat. Captain Monroe's boots crunched up behind her. "He's on something," Leah said, breath quick. "Looks that way," Monroe replied, already signaling the team forward. 2 minutes later, the lock was snapped and the door wrenched open. It wasn't the worst they'd seen, but that didn't make it easier. 3 girls, huddled together on a filthy mattress in the corner, recoiled from the sudden burst of sunlight. Their wrists bore old zip-tie marks. Their eyes, those were the hardest. They weren't crying. They looked like they'd run out of tears days ago. Axel didn't bark. He simply approached, head lowered, ears soft, body loose. He moved like he knew how fragile the moment was. The youngest girl, maybe 14, reached out with a trembling hand and touched the top of his head. "He's real," she whispered. "He's real." Leah knelt beside them, throat tight. She had nothing rehearsed, nothing profound. She just offered water, a blanket, and sat with them in silence until medics arrived. Later, in the fading light, Monroe pulled her aside. "You've been doing this job like it was yours all along," he said. "We're folding into the Joint Task Force. They want you on it. Officially." Leah blinked. "Me? But I'm not. I didn't train. You've got instincts, the kind we can't teach, and you've got Axel." That name hit her harder than she expected. Axel. The same dog who had once flinched at shadows now strode through nightmares like he was born for it. His PTSD hadn't vanished, but it had sharpened into something fierce and purposeful, like he'd taken all that pain and turned it into a compass. Leah looked over at him. He was watching her from the passenger seat of the cruiser, ears alert, head tilted, waiting. She nodded, mostly to herself. "I'm in." The next 48 hours blurred. The girls had been missing from 2 states away. Their stories were nearly identical: abduction, false job offers, then silence. But it was what came next that cracked everything wider. One of the girls, Alina, a 17-year-old from Knoxville, mentioned a man with a limp and a voice like gravel. Said he made deliveries in an unmarked van with a South Carolina plate. She remembered a specific word he used when speaking on the phone: depot. And she remembered the smell of motor oil and pine. The agents traced the license plate through toll cameras, and it popped up again on surveillance outside an abandoned lumberyard outside Columbia. That's where the dots connected, between Luther Kane, the maintenance man from the shelter, and a shell company linked to an even bigger web. The task force began to understand. This wasn't just one network. It was a supply chain, and there were still more pieces missing. On the 3rd day, Leah found herself in a small FBI office surrounded by pin boards, maps, and too many red strings. She stared at a photo of her younger brother on the wall, Josh, in his academy uniform, grinning like the world couldn't touch him. She touched the edge of the photo. "I'm picking up where you left off, baby brother," she whispered. Behind her, Axel stirred. His tail tapped once against the tile floor. The war wasn't over, but they'd started turning the tide. Outside, night crept in over the hills, but in that small office, the lights stayed on. The hunt would continue, and this time, they weren't alone. The wind was sharper than usual that morning, not cold, just clear, like it had something to say. It rolled over the faded brick facade of Brookstone Elementary one last time, catching the edges of police tape flapping in tired loops, then curled past a cluster of quiet onlookers gathered outside the school gates. No ribbon cutting, no podium. Just a line of folding chairs someone had dragged from the firehouse, a thermos of stale coffee on the ground, and a silence too full to be called empty. Leah stood off to the side, her FBI badge tucked away. She wasn't here as an agent, not today. She was just Leah, the sister who almost didn't make it back in time, the woman who listened when Axel froze mid-step and refused to move, the one who hadn't looked away. Beside her, Axel sat motionless, his graying muzzle catching the morning light. A hand-knitted maroon scarf rested around his neck, slightly crooked from the wind. It wasn't for show. It had been given to him by one of the girls they'd found in that last house, the one who hadn't spoken a word in weeks until she'd placed the scarf on his neck, then tucked a crumpled note into Leah's palm. It read, in shaky pencil, "He stayed. That's why we're alive." Axel didn't look at the crowd. He looked at the building as if remembering the breath caught in the walls. The footsteps that didn't make noise. The kids who didn't cry because they knew no one was coming. He had heard them before anyone else did. The demolition crews would come tomorrow, and the new center, Rangers Haven, would rise in its place. A safe house, trauma clinic, and community outreach program wrapped into one. A space built not on pity, but on promise. Captain Monroe was there too, hat in hand, flanked by local officers who no longer wore the same expressions they used to. Some of them had been slow to act. Some had looked the other way. None of them would forget what followed. No one spoke for a long while. Then Leah stepped forward. She didn't pull out a speech or clear her throat. Her voice was low, steady, but it reached. There's no plaque, no ceremony, no headlines. Just this. She gestured gently toward the dog who hadn't moved. He stayed. Not because he was trained to, not because anyone told him to, but because he could feel what we chose to ignore. She paused. I used to think courage looked like a badge, or a gun, or a courtroom, she said. Turns out, it sometimes looks like a dog who plants himself on the sidewalk and refuses to leave until someone listens. She let the silence settle again, then looked out across the crowd. What about you? She asked. Has anyone, animal or human, ever stayed for you when no one else did? One of the younger girls in the back nodded, barely visible behind a coat 3 sizes too big. A man next to her reached down and placed a hand on her shoulder. A boy from town approached Axel, not too close, just enough to read the tag on his collar. He whispered something no one else caught, then stepped back and wiped his nose with his sleeve. The wind moved again. Behind them, a woman handed out flyers for the new center. No branding, just a question printed in bold across the top. What if someone had stayed sooner? Leah turned toward Axel. He didn't wag his tail, didn't break into some obedient display. He just sat there, like he always had, waiting, watching, listening. And as the sun broke over the roofline of Brookstone for the last time, casting long shadows that stretched toward the fence line and beyond, Leah felt it deep in her chest. Not everything had been saved, but enough had been heard. And maybe that was where it starts. If this story meant something to you, share it. Because somewhere, someone is waiting for a voice that doesn't come from sirens or speeches, but from a dog who stays and a human who chooses to listen. Support the channel, subscribe, and tell us who stayed for you.